Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is Dan Lizette, and before we get this week's show started, a couple quick announcements, thank yous, and updates, if you will. As you folks have been hearing for the last couple of months now, the Podcast Digest has joined Patreon, and I really appreciate those individuals who have chosen to support the show that way. And of course, there's tons of ways to support the show, right? You know, telling your friends, Twitter and Facebook, or writing an iTunes review, and I love each and every one of you who have taken just a few minutes to do that as well. Patreon is kind of next level support, and I do want to mention those individuals specifically who have taken the time to do that. I've added 2 new Patreons since you guys last heard an update from me on this topic, and I just want to mention them very quickly. Mike Boudet from Sword and Scale, one of my favorite shows in iTunes altogether, Sword and Scale. You guys have heard me talk about it many, many times. I don't need to go into any further detail, but thank you, Mike, for your support. Jason Bryant from Matt Talk Podcast Network has also joined. Jason is let me know via email that he's a huge fan of the show as well, and there's a good chance you guys may hear from Jason in the future. So Jason, thank you very much for supporting the Podcast Digest. Okay, coming up this week for this episode right now, you guys are about to hear from Dan Franks. Dan Franks is the co-founder of Podcast Movement. This year it's in Chicago, the week of July 4th, the Wednesday through Friday following the Monday holiday. You guys are about to hear this episode, and we're going to talk all about Podcast Movement 2016, a great event, and you will learn a lot more about that. Something I hope that each and every one of you may consider. At the time that this interview was recorded, I was sort of non-committal at the point. I was working on some details, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it to Chicago in July. Well, since this recording finished, I have since confirmed that indeed I will be in Chicago from July 6th through the 8th for Podcast Movement 2016, the third Podcast Movement, and I am super excited. I encourage you guys to check out the website. If you're a podcaster or considering being a podcaster, or especially if you're close to Chicago or know somebody in Chicago, really take a good hard look at this. It could be an absolute sort of podcast changing experience, if you will. I very much think it might be for me in the Podcast Digest, and I cannot tell you how much I'm looking forward to meeting many of the past guests and more than likely many of you listening right now. So I will be in Chicago in July, and I would really like to hear from you. If you are planning on going, let me know on Twitter at PodDigest, or shoot me an email, thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. Let me know you're going to be there, and I'm going to try to meet up with as many of you who are going to be in Chicago that week to meet somebody in person in the real world who actually listens to my voice every single week. And I know there are so many of you out there, but to actually meet some of them is going to be really cool. So that's enough for the intro this week. Let's get on to this week's episode. Dan Franks, co-founder of Podcast Movement. Let's bring him on. Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is episode 88. Thank you guys very much for checking out the show. And I've got a different kind of show this week, not necessarily focusing on a particular podcast or host, but rather a larger event in the world of podcasting. As you guys and gals know, I've kind of gone to great lengths in the last 87 episodes to make sure that I brought to you what I think are some of the best podcasts in the world, as well as awesome conversations with the people who make those shows. But there's much more to these shows, their hosts, and the process as a whole than I could ever really cover in an hour-a-week show. But fortunately, if you're a current or potential future podcaster, there's one surefire way to get much more info and guidance directly from many of my previous guests and literally dozens and dozens more of people doing great work in the podcasting space. One way would be to check out and consider attending Podcast Movement. Podcast Movement is a national podcaster-centric conference this year. It's happening in July in Chicago for 2016, and I'm thrilled for my guest today to talk more about this event with Podcast Movement co-founder Dan Franks. Dan, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Dan, thank you for having me.
Well,
the Dan Show.
It is the Dan and Dan Show. Yeah, as we were talking about before, I will not forget your name. That's
No,
for sure.
and I promise not to forget yours either.
Wow, it would be funny if either one of us did. That would be a thing, that's for sure. I brought you here to talk all about podcast movement, and I'm super excited about this, just from all the things that are going to be happening there. But before we dig into that, the meat of the conversation, if you will, for somebody who doesn't know who Dan Franks is, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself personally, your background in podcasting, and kind of your road up to the podcast movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think most people involved in podcasting these days, and it's one of the best things about podcasting, is it's a non-traditional path to get to where I am right now, and even to get to podcasting in general. But the short story is I'm a CPA by trade. My background is in tax accounting, so people hearing this, just last week was tax day in the U.S., and this is my first year to not be preparing hundreds and hundreds of tax returns for all sorts of individuals and businesses. So a very relaxing April compared to April of the past decade or so. But yeah, my background is as a CPA. And my entry into podcasting really was meeting a fellow CPA at my day job who was interested in podcasts and also potentially podcasting. And he and I teamed up to do a very generic entrepreneur interview show, like so many are out there. Lasted about a year. Quickly figured out there was not just a whole lot unique going on with us, and decided not to pollute the podcast ecosystem anymore. So we closed that down. But during the course of us doing that podcast, we both set out to kind of further our podcast knowledge and meet some other people in the space. And that brought us to a New Media Expo, which was kind of the predominant conference that included podcasters in the past 7 or 8 years, really. I went through a couple different names. But we went to that conference, just like I said, looking to further our knowledge and further our networking in the podcast space. And while there, I met up with a bunch of other podcasters, of course. And a few I met with, we kind of were sitting around lunch talking one day and thought, well, this is weird. We're at this conference and most of the people at the conference are podcasters, and but it's not a conference for podcasters. It's a conference for anything new media, social media, blogging, web TV, and that kind of got the wheels turning in our head that, wow, maybe we could create some kind of event that focused mainly towards podcasters. So that's where the kind of path to podcast movement started. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Just started out as probably a lot of people listening as a hobbyist podcaster, and totally am still just a hobbyist podcaster myself. But really just by happenstance, meeting a few people and going to a few events got me to being one of the guys running this crazy conference now.
Was this one of those, the bug bit you situations when you first started that entrepreneurial show that lasted about a year? Was this like an immediate thing for you? Like it immediately kind of, grabbed you and caught your attention and immediately kind of turned up the enthusiasm volume for you?
The interesting thing is, I would say yes in terms of podcasting as a medium and podcasting as just a viable something, whatever that something is. Not necessarily as a podcast host. So while I certainly enjoyed my time talking into the microphone and hanging out with my friend and interviewing some cool people, that was obviously a fun thing. But really the thing that got me into doing that to begin with was just how much I love the space and love the on-demand audio format. So I think really what that deepened in me was not necessarily my love for hosting a podcast, but more just how awesome the space was and how far I think it could go, and of course still could go.
So coming from a background as a CPA, you mentioned the first year not doing tax returns, woo, for a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like to me that it maybe the business side of podcasting was something that kind of caught your attention.
Yeah, totally. And it's not business side in terms of, hey, this would be a great way to make money, because we all know that anything that's out there, especially in media and new media, there's people that see dollar signs and think that they're going to get rich or get rich quick or something. And not the business side like that, but just the business side of of the industry as a whole. And hey, this is something sustainable. This is something that in some way, shape, or form I could turn into a career. That side of the business view of it, I would agree with that.
Gotcha. And the reason I bring that up is that you do have an active role, if you will, on the business side of the podcasting with one of the companies that I know works with a lot of podcasts out there. And a lot of people listening right now are podcast hosts, Dan, and podcast creators themselves. And a lot of them have probably thought of or toyed with the idea of bringing in sponsors or advertising. And a lot of that, for a lot of people, it's a huge mystery, and monetization in general. But you are the business manager with Midroll Media. Can you tell folks a little bit about Midroll and about your role with the company, and maybe give folks a little bit of guidance on what your thoughts are on an independent podcaster bringing in advertising?
Yeah, so this is something that's relatively new. I just started this role with Midroll in December, but it did kind of spawn from my involvement in the Podcast Movement Conference. Last year, our 2015 event had a number of representatives from Midroll and Earwolf, the podcast network that's underneath the Midroll umbrella, and had them as some speakers. The CEO, Adam Sachs, actually was a part of one of our keynotes. He interviewed Mark Maron on stage last year. And much like my relationships with the hundreds and hundreds of podcasters and industry people that I've developed just running the conference, I began that relationship with them. And they were last year, around the same time of Podcast Movement, they were acquired by a publicly traded company, EW Scripps, which is a big company that owns a lot of TV stations and radio stations and has started growing its digital wing. And they acquired Midroll as a digital property. And around that time, once they were acquired, they told Midroll, you really need to start building out your team to grow the company and further yourself in the industry. So that led Midroll to looking for somebody to kind of build out the business side and the financial side of the company. And they were seeking a CPA with podcast industry experience. And they came to me because they knew me as a CPA with podcast industry experience. So it was a pretty decent match. And I wasn't actively looking to get out of taxes. But at the same time, I wasn't just super in love with it, but I was in love with podcasting and the podcast industry. So it really was just a good fit to take my, my expertise in accounting and business, business advice I was giving all my clients and transition that to the podcast space. And that's really how I ended up with Midroll. And just briefly, anyone who's not familiar with Midroll, it's a parent company. We have a couple different activities going on under it, if you will. But the main business is selling ads on podcasts. So like you mentioned, there's a lot of podcasters trying to figure out ways to make this hobby a sustainable one and potentially even a career. And that's one of the best ways to do that. And the largest scale is with ads on podcasts, and Midroll is the largest seller of ads to independent podcasters. So, our job is to find the best podcasters and the best and most interested podcast advertisers and almost play, matchmaker like that Millionaire Matchmaker, where we have these two awesome sets of advertisers and podcasters and find the best fit and introduce them to each other and put the two together and handle all the messy stuff in the middle so that the podcaster can keep doing what they're doing, creating awesome content, and not have to worry about any of the sales side of things or the technical side of things. And the advertisers don't have to listen to thousands of podcasts to find the great fit. We sit in the middle and we maintain both those relationships and really maximize the value for both sides. So that's Midroll. And as business manager, like I said, I'm on the finance side of things, but also work on a couple special projects that are going to be come out soon. But I wear a lot of different hats. It's still a pretty small company. We do operate a lot like a startup. So a lot of different hats going on.
Excellent. Well, I know folks would wonder about that, and they can always reach you or Midroll in general if they want to explore any options, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the cool things is everyone at Midroll is pretty, I don't know if you call it open door when it's email, but the website has every single employee's email address linked directly on that page, so anyone can reach out to me there or anywhere else. I'm not hard to find.
Awesome. Let's get to the real reason we're here today, Dan. Podcast movement. Go back in time here. You said that you're coming out of New Media Expo, a bunch of you guys talking over dinner or what have you, and said, let's start to kind of create this idea for a more podcaster-centric experience. How does it get from that conversation to the first ever podcast movement? What was that process like?
It was pretty crazy, really. None of us had any experience running events. None of us were really anybody in the podcast space. We didn't have a ton of connections or a ton of pull anywhere. But we just had that idea and thought that it was a good one. And our way to kind of test that theory out was we created a Kickstarter campaign to call upon the podcaster community and more or less say, is this something you guys want? Do you want a conference that's only for podcasters? One that's not, a local podcamp or a little regionalized thing, but a full couple-day conference where people, speakers, and attendees come from all over the world to, talk about podcasting. And we put that Kickstarter campaign up, and we really had, looking back now at what it really costs to run an event, we had really low goals. We set our goal at, I think, somewhere around $11,000. So the idea was after Kickstarter fees, we would have $10,000, and that would be enough to rent a venue for 2 days and all the different audio video fees to rent a little community center is what it amounted to. A little civic center with a few ballrooms and a lobby area. And we thought, if we could get $10,000, we could put on a really bare bone event. We were expecting maybe 200 or so attendees. And this was all in early 2014 is when all this was going on. So that $11,000 goal on Kickstarter, we actually hit that goal and collected that amount of pledges in the first 24 hours. And then over the next 29 days, that Kickstarter ask reached over $30,000. So we more than tripled what we had originally set out to do. And that was our first kind of, I guess people would call it a light bulb moment or something like that, where that light bulb went off and said, hey, maybe this is not just a good idea, but maybe it's a great idea. And maybe there isn't just a little demand for it, but maybe there's a lot. And yeah, we put all that together, and it was really only about 6 months later when the actual event happened, and we had over 600 attendees there. So we tripled what we thought we would do in terms of size. And we actually even had to change venues 3 times leading up to the event just because we kept outgrowing each one that we had put our names on. So it was really a roller coaster ride, and the trajectory pointed up a lot quicker than we thought it would, and a lot of trial by fire, to be honest.
So, and you were doing CPA stuff during this time?
Yeah, I was doing CPA stuff up until December of 2015. So totally.
This was like you were putting the first podcast movement together on like nights and weekends.
Yeah, both. Yeah, totally nights and weekends. There was many times where I was doing taxes at the office until around midnight, but I would step out and close the door in a meeting room and have a call with a sponsor, or have a call with somebody trying to sell them an exhibitor booth or trying to negotiate with some speakers. So yeah, it was that first year, and it kind of continues almost being a full-time job for sure.
Was there a freak out moment for you, Dan? Was it after that first 24 hours of the Kickstarter? Did you ever get this, maybe we bit off a little more than we could chew feeling?
Not too much. We've always kind of been white knuckling it and holding on for dear life, just hoping the whole thing doesn't collapse. I really, I hate a lot of the buzzwords or a lot of the things that the business books talk about, but I did feel a bit of imposter syndrome, and still somewhat do, in that, this is the only event I really put on. I put on some smaller things, but at this point, this is the only thing of this magnitude. I'm not a professional event planner. I'm not a great podcaster. I'm, like I said, a hobbyist podcaster, yet most people know me for putting on this thing that a lot of people really like. And I still kind of feel like eventually, they're going to figure me out. I don't really know what I'm doing. But no, I don't think there's ever kind of been that, oh crap moment. And maybe, to be perfectly honest, just kind of taking a step back, it might be because things at the beginning were moving so fast and continue to, that there's just not a whole lot of time to worry. All the free time is spent doing something. Right. So I think that could potentially be the reason why.
So how'd the first year go?
It went really well. It's hard to, I'm critical of myself, like I think probably most podcasters and content creators are. If you're not, then you're probably not a very good one if you just think you're doing awesome. So I'm critical of myself, but the overall and overwhelming feedback after the first year was, wow, this was great. Really, the feedback we heard the most was, for a first year event, this was awesome, and this would have been good even if it wasn't a first year event. So, that's good news. But people were still kind of making that caveat that, well, for a first year event, it was really good, which is great. But, being super critical of everything we do, we wanted to do better. But yeah, the feedback was great. The post-event surveys, which is anyone who puts on an event knows that's a really important thing and really important information to collect from people. And I think we had over 95% of the people say they would come back the next year, and the numbers show that they did. The biggest criticism we had after the first year, and these are the things that, as now an event planner, we really like, is that criticism and the constructive criticism of what we can do better. After that first year, we got criticism that we had a lot of business-focused podcasts. And, that was the thing that we took to heart and really implemented changes for the next year, because quite honestly, we were certainly not trying to be a marketing podcast event. But looking back now, it did look a little bit like that. And a lot of it had to do with myself and the other organizers. That's where our relationships were with those kinds of podcasters and people from that genre. So naturally, when we're doing a first year event and trying to call in a bunch of favors, those were the people that we called in the favors to. So as awesome as the event was, kind of looking back with a constructive eye, that was our biggest takeaway of that first year is, hey, we need to make this event more well-rounded because we did want it to be for the entire podcaster community.
At what point did you anticipate a year two? Before 14 even began, were you thinking about the second year, or were you kind of waiting to see if this thing, imploded in your face or not, or what was kind of the game plan from the outset?
Yeah, well, the fear was certainly there that it was going to implode, but one of the things we learned during putting together that first year was, and it was crazy for me to fathom, but most venues get booked up more than a year in advance, which, to me, it was kind of mind-boggling that there's that many events going on around the country that book up these giant hotel rooms every weekend, 1, 2, sometimes 3 years in advance. So when we were trying to find new venues during the planning of that first year as the event was growing, we soon realized, if this is going to be an annual thing, which was always the intention, we've got to start booking a venue for next year now, before the first year even happens, which was scary because, every time when I'm signing a new contract, they've got a giant 6 or sometimes 7-figure liability that you're signing on to guarantee. And I was signing one of those before the first year ever took place. So, wow. Like you said, it totally could have blown up in our face, and I would have been making a pleading phone call to the venue of our year two event, trying to figure out what the heck we can do to get out of that contract.
So I want to move from year 1 to year 2, but I'm sitting here and I'm looking at all the websites for all 3 years, and something's just clicking to me. You guys aren't even waiting a year, are you? You keep backing this up on the calendar, giving yourselves like 11 and a half months each time. Is this kind of along those lines? Is it just kind of venue availability?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Actually, we're basically signed a contract for 2017 now, and it'll actually push it back a lot closer to what that first year's date was in August. But there's a couple factors. First, like you said, the venue availability is hard to come by. And this whole venue negotiation process is pretty crazy because there's so many moving pieces. And to do these events like the ones we're doing, which are at large hotel ballrooms, you have to guarantee a certain number of hotel rooms that either your attendees will stay in and purchase those rooms, or if they don't, then that's money out of our pocket that we're paying for those hotel rooms that go unused. And then you have to guarantee a certain dollar value of food and beverages, either purchased by you or by your attendees during the events. So there's really a bunch of moving pieces to all these venue negotiations. And of course, the venues want you to guarantee more rooms and pay more money for food and beverage. So we might find a venue we really like that has the capacity, that actually has the availability, but we're not willing to sign on and guarantee one of those things at the level that they want it. So that's not available to us. So really just a bunch of moving pieces like that. And then, trying to figure out a location and trying to figure out all these different things, like location geographically. Like I said, just so many moving pieces that I hate to say we take what we can get, but just jumping and making a small comment on this topic for year 3, a lot of people notice that, hey, we're the week right after 4th of July, not the best week. But in Chicago at the awesome hotel and the awesome venue we're doing it at, it was kind of take it or leave it. Like, hey, you guys are too small and not paying us enough money, basically. But we have this one weekend that you can have this awesome venue because it's not a desirable weekend. So, like I said, a lot of different factors into play. And yes, you're right, though. Giving ourselves 11 months in between each event has given us some challenges, but it's been fine, and we'll actually, I think, have about 13 months next year, so we'll finally get to take a little breath.
Which was my next question. So year 14 ends. How soon after that, that last session closes, do you guys start to actively work on 15?
Well, yeah, like I said, we were already doing venue negotiations and signing venue contracts for 2015 before 2014 happened. Starting preliminary speaker negotiations because a lot of these speakers will get booked up more than a year in advance. And yeah, quite honestly, like one just bleeds into the other. It kind of the closing final piece after each year is that post-event survey. I talked about getting the feedback from everybody, and also we've for 3 years in a row now offered what we call our virtual ticket, which is on-demand recordings of all the sessions because we have a lot of different things going on at once, and we don't want people that paid their good money to come to the event to have to decide between a couple different sessions, and they really want to see both. Well, this way they're able to watch one on demand and go to the other and not just freak out about it or anything like that. So that's the other piece that kind of lingers towards the end of the event and afterwards, is trying to upload 80 videos to to a secure website for people to watch those videos. But yeah, one really bleeds into the other. From everything from speaker negotiations to venue negotiations to sponsor negotiations. It really does not stop, and there's a lot of crossover there.
Let's talk a little bit about the speakers, because the lineups, and I'm still kind of, we're going to talk a lot about year 3 here in just a minute, but I'm looking at, you mentioned earlier about sort of, you were using the contacts you could bring in, right? The people you could call in favors for in 2014. But I'm looking at the lineup and comparing it from 14 to 15, and 15 felt like, as an observer and just from looking at the listing here, it just blew up. You guys went and got some of the biggest names out there, much higher in sort of quantity. It seemed like a much more packed schedule. Talk about that process of starting to pull some of these people in, and what were sort of some of your favorite stories or experiencing in building this roster?
I think the biggest reason for that evolution was that feedback we got, which was, your event's not well-rounded enough. If you want it to be for the entire podcaster community, you really need to have better representation. And that's everything from, like I mentioned earlier, not having so many business podcasters there and having more people from the public radio or the public radio backgrounds, like your Radiotopia type people, maybe more sports podcasts, or just more well-rounded in terms of who's represented, as well as represent more. There needs to be more female representation. There needs to be more minority representation. All of these things were feedback we got, and a bunch of totally valid feedback, but just things that, as non-event organizers who, like I said, had been white-knuckling it for the past few months, just things that we hadn't had a chance to step back and think about or realize was going on. So I think all those factors were the biggest reasons why it was more well-rounded. Add in the fact that we more or less doubled the number of attendees, were able to secure more sponsors, obviously gave us a bigger budget to bring in some of those bigger names. I know you've had Roman Mars on the show before, and a couple of the other Radiotopia people that were at Podcast Movement 2015, and those are perfect examples of people that we couldn't have afforded to bring in year one anyways, but B, they weren't quite honestly on our radar. They just weren't relationships we had, and they're relationships that we really set out to build and develop for 2015 to make it that more well-rounded event. So I think that was the biggest reason why you saw such a discrepancy. And of course, to attract more attendees, we need bigger and better names. We had Aisha Tyler, who is a famous movie comedian, TV show comedian, and a really cool podcaster. We had her, but I think and a couple others for sure. We had some awesome speakers. I don't need to go over them all, but you asked for a story, and kind of the craziest story it was the story that led us to having Mark Maron headline Podcast Movement 2015. And I can tell you 100% that was not in the plans, not in the works until about 3 weeks before Podcast Movement ever happened. Pretty good story how we got to that. It wasn't good at the time. And maybe you did ask about if I'd ever had an opportunity or thought that it might all collapse. And this is probably the closest I ever got to that. Was we had booked as a keynote speaker Glenn Beck, who is the conservative television commentator, whatever you would call him, had a Fox News show for a long time, super controversial political figure. But we had him booked as one of our keynote speakers, which came about by his representatives coming to us and more or less offering him to us as a keynote speaker for no cost to us. Glenn Beck is based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area and super popular, but also super hated. And it was it was something we gave a lot of thought to when we were approached about having him as a part of the event. And ultimately our decision to accept him as a speaker was just based on his track record in the media space. He runs The Blaze, which is it's more or less a fully online television station, and it's the largest of its kind. He makes the most money. He's got the most viewership. All of the any metric there is, he's the biggest in this online medium, and it includes podcasts. So that's why it was relevant to us. But just has this big media network called The Blaze. And we thought, well, setting aside any kind of political connotations or political views, this guy had built something really awesome and really cool that we could all learn from as long as that was the topic of conversation. So yes, Glenn Beck will be a good fit. And we were met with a lot of backlash, but also a lot of support. I can say we only had one person request a refund out of, I think we probably had 700 or 800 tickets sold by that time. Which was, to me, an accomplishment. I expected a lot more just because Glenn Beck was a pretty controversial figure. And that one refund, we actually talked through our thought process with that person, and they ended up not asking a refund. But so we had Glenn Beck booked. We had gotten through that big craziness of him, of the firestorm and all of these things that were associated with us announcing him. Thought we were kind of back on track. And then 3 weeks before the event, I get a call from his agent, or whatever you would call her, and she says, "You know what? I hate to break this news to you, but Glenn has been diagnosed with some throat disease or something, and his doctor says he's not allowed to talk for 3 weeks. He can't. He's not doing his radio show. He's not doing his TV show, and unfortunately, he's not doing Podcast Movement." So here's this guy that we took all this craziness from. We had marked off one of our giant keynote sessions for him, and we have this open spot. So what are we going to do here? And we went into panic mode. Myself and Jared Easley, one of the co-founders with me and co-organizers, he's the most hands-on with me. I called him and I said, what do we do? We've got to do something. We've got to, we can't let anybody down, even the people that didn't want to see him. We had convinced them how awesome it was going to be. So now, all of a sudden, here's this void. And this was right after Mark Maron had interviewed Barack Obama, the president, on his podcast. So Jared says, the only way I think we can make this up and not only just slide in some random substitute, but actually use this as a positive instead of a negative, is to ask Mark Maron. So we went on the offensive and started trying to figure out how the heck can we get a hold of this guy, and what are the chances on 3 weeks' notice we can get, at that time, certainly the most famous podcaster, having just had the president in his garage for his podcast.
It had to feel like a long shot at the point of the idea, didn't it?
Totally. It was a Hail Mary, and I think when I finally got a contact for his agent, that was my exact word, was like, I know this is a long shot, but you can't score the touchdown unless you throw the pass. So this is the pass. And, one thing, we were able to work it out. One thing led to another, and we were able to have Mark there. And it was phenomenal having Mark there. And that ultimately became the highlight of the event, was not just Mark's talk, but Mark being there. Like I said, certainly the biggest podcaster we had present at the event. And not only to have him there, but Mark was the most down-to-earth guy. We had a party off-site the night before he spoke, and he took a cab out to he flew in late that night and took a cab out to the party and just hung out with people. After his talk, he was looking around the exhibitor floor, testing out microphones, taking pictures with every single fan that wanted to, and really went from what could have been a really a bad thing and turned it into just an awesome experience, not just for us to have him as a part of our event, but all the attendees that were there that got to meet and greet with him. So it turned into a really cool thing.
It sounds like a brilliant Hail Mary, because I don't know who first came up with the idea, but, I've been a WTF listener for a better part of a year. I'm a little late to the party, but every time I listen to an episode of him, even just the way he opens his show, he's like, "Hi, welcome to my podcast." He loves his podcast, and he tells the story all the time about how it was, he had reached the bottom, and it was just this thing he was going to do, and he didn't know what else to do, and he's had all this wonderful experience because of doing it. And it's like, there's an argument to be made that some people may know him as a podcaster first and a comedian second.
Oh, I think most people do.
You know what I mean?
Nowadays, totally.
Yeah, and what a brilliant person to kind of close out the show and keynote, because he just fits. It makes sense, of him being there in the first place, and I think it's super cool that it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when we finally got the thumbs up, we were pretty speechless, and it went off as flawlessly as it could have. So yeah, we were thrilled. So
during 14 and 15. What are you doing, Dan? Are you like running around every day to all the sessions, like opening every door and making sure that everybody showed up? Like, what is your role during the event?
Yeah, believe it or not, that's exactly what I was doing.
I was just guessing.
Yeah, no. The first year we had about a half or 2/3 as many sessions. So that first year it was much easier to stick my head in and make sure everything was going on. But last year I did it as well. It's just, when you spend so much time and effort putting all these pieces together, you want to make sure it happens. And I always say it's pretty funny that we built this event that we really wanted to go to, and now the last thing we get to ever do is enjoy the event itself. But we I think enjoy it even more being able to build this thing. But yeah, I'm totally sticking my head in every room. I've got the walkie-talkie to all the different people at the venue. If somebody's audio is too low, or if I see the video not working right or something, my goal is to be the first one to notice it and the first one to make sure it gets fixed. So this year I've actually I'm partnering with some people to take some of that burden off, and really people that are more experienced than me doing these things to try to just continue to heighten the experience, and also let me take a breath and maybe sleep a little bit in the nights in between.
You're like a wedding coordinator on steroids. I mean, it's like multiple rooms, hundreds of people,
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, my mom, whenever I tell people I've never done an event before, she's always a good mom and says, "Well, your wedding was really nice, and you put most of that together, so that was really your first event that you coordinated." So, she would say that too.
Well, as folks listening know, I'm a mobile DJ, and I had a big hand and my wedding as well. But I can tell you what, I don't get married every year.
No, and most people don't invite 1,500 or 2,000 people to their wedding either.
Exactly. So take me to the first couple days after 15, right? The much bigger show and much bigger schedule. What was the feedback like that time? Did it have a markedly different feeling than year one?
Yes, it did. So first of all, year one we didn't really have any speaker budget. Year two, I figured out when you deal with some of these speakers that have Hollywood agents you go through, you pay them half their fee when you secure the contract, but the other half you pay after services performed. So my very first day was a trip to the bank to wire a bunch of money out of our account to the various speakers. So that was the first thing. But yeah, the survey was good, about the same, about a 95% yes, we'll come back rating, which again was phenomenal and above kind of industry standards. The feedback was surprisingly it was different, but it was also the same in some places. What I say is that anyone who was at both years gave it a much better grade in terms of like the variety. Like I was saying, our goal in between the 2 years was to have more variety, more well-rounded of an event. And anyone that was at both years, thumbs up, we did exactly that. But the people that were there for the first time last year still had a little sense of, hey, it kind of felt a little bit like a business podcast conference kind of thing. So it was funny to see that discrepancy. Whereas the first year everyone was in agreement, the second year you could tell who was there and who wasn't, because there was certainly an effort and it was visible that we put that effort into making it more well-rounded. But there was those people that looking at it from a fresh eye with no frame of reference, still had that feeling. So that's, again, something we focused on between year 2 and year 3.
What's your working theory on that, Dan? Why do you think it reared its head again in year 2? Yeah. I just had an idea jump to my mind, and I'm kind of curious what yours is. The hardest thing that we're doing is we're getting to a size to where we're attracting a lot of people from a lot of different places. So originally we set out to be more or less a conference for hobbyist podcasters or people that are podcasting part-time. But last year we started attracting people attending who were full-time podcasters, people attending who were people who had roots in public radio, people attending who were employees of podcast companies. So just the fact that the event was attracting so many more people, that the attendees and the type of attendee that were at year one, they did appreciate that. But the people, again, that were looking at it with fresh eyes and maybe coming from a completely different place in the podcasting spectrum, they just viewed it differently. I mean, that's my biggest thing, is I think just because we're having such a variety of attendees, that's why it's continuing to evolve, and we're continuing to have to evolve who's speaking, what the topics are on, and all those things. And I think, isn't it also, would you agree with it, that part of the challenge here is sort of the scale, right? Just to put in sort of a simile here, if you were going to have a baseball conference that's open to all baseball players, you could pull up everything from Little League to semi-pro to college to Major League Baseball. And if you're going to focus a conversation around baseball, that is like wildly different audience. And to try to serve each and every one of them what they personally may feel they want or need from the experience, that's a supreme challenge. Is that sort of a fair sort of summary of the challenge you guys face each year?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The one thing that we set out to not be was a fan conference. So there's podcast festivals and all of these things. And certainly we 100% put the flag in the ground. We're not on the consumer side. We're not trying to attract listeners. We are trying to attract the content creators. But that evolved into not just the content creators, but in year 2, we wanted the creators and people from podcast companies. So whether it's your Gimlet or your WNYC or any of these things, these people who are what would you call them? Front office staff people or producers, behind the scenes people, really more of the industry side of things. And then this year, we're going to be attracting a lot of broadcast people looking to dip their toes in podcasting or maybe making the full jump into podcasting. So, yeah, exactly like you said, because the umbrella that covers our, who our attendees are is getting bigger and bigger and wider. I think that's why it's a little bit of a moving target for us.
So let's talk about 2016. Coming out of the feedback you got last year, and what was the goals? Talk to me about building the show that folks have the chance to go and attend here in a couple of months. First of all, if you would, start out with the change of venue for me. You guys moved across the country.
Yeah, so we didn't talk about it too much, but the first 2 years were both in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and that was for good reason, because 4 of us originally founded the conference, and 3 of the 4 of us still are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, majority rules, and that's why it was in DFW the first 2 years. In addition to DFW and the Dallas area being easily accessible from anywhere in the country, 2 airports, not too far from either coast. So it made sense for a national conference. But we really wanted to not be perceived as a Texas show. We weren't a Texas conference. We had people that complained about doing events in Texas in the summer. It's hot here. It's hot everywhere, really. It's hot in Chicago where we're going. But just that perception of Texas in the summer was a little bit of a deterrent for some people, and they voiced that to us. But we wanted to be somewhere that had a lot of interest in podcasting, and also somewhere that was still easily accessible. And we figured if we were going to go on the road, we wanted somewhere that was a little bit of a destination town. Dallas, I love it. I live here, but it's not a destination town. People don't want a vacation here. So all of those things went into us choosing Chicago, 2 international airports, just like we have here in Texas, central time zone, somewhat central to anywhere. But the other cool thing about Chicago was that it has a pretty rich history in audio production, in podcasting, but just audio in general. And we thought that was pretty cool. WBEZ, which is it's a public radio station that produces This American Life, which most people know is the most downloaded podcast pretty much every week. But for the past decade or so, it's more or less been on top. Also recently produced Serial. So they have some big name podcasts and radio shows they produce there, and also have a pretty cool library of regularly produced just straight to podcast shows that a lot of people maybe haven't heard of, but they're really cool. Some of them represented this year at Podcast Movement. So WBZ there was a kind of a validating factor, as well as something called Third Coast, which the Third Coast Audio Festival is something that is targeted more towards public radio people and public radio content creators, but a lot of podcasters that everyone would know, whether it's Leah Tao from Strangers or Roman Mars from 99% Invisible, they got their starts at this Third Coast Audio Festival. So a lot of podcasters, whether they're attendees or speakers, have some pretty deep roots in Chicago as well. So all of those factors combined had us choose Chicago, and we're super excited that that's where we're headed.
And in terms of creating, and I should be fair, as we sit here and record today, this is April 18th. You guys are hearing this now on the 24th, and I know this is still somewhat, a lot of the details are probably still coming together, but as you guys have started to craft and create the speaker list and the workshop list and the schedule, what are some of the things maybe you're looking at doing differently than, say, last year, or what are some of the things that you want to make sure that are in the Chicago podcast movement to kind of make it the best yet?
Well, so the generic format of the event will be somewhat similar, and just to quickly overview that, it's opening keynotes the first day and closing keynotes the second day. Quickly to rattle off our keynote speakers: Alex Bloomberg from Gimlet and Startup, Anna Sale from Death, Sex, and Money, Glenn Washington from Snap Judgment, Hebben and Tracy from Another Round, and then Kevin Smith from Smodcast, but a lot of people know him as Silent Bob, or the movie producer. He's been in a lot of stuff. So those keynote speakers will start and close the event. But then in between, that's the bread of the sandwich, but the meat of the sandwich are over 100 breakout sessions and panels and workshops that happen during the middle of those 2 days, where it's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure thing where people can pick a track and they can follow that track, whether they're there to learn marketing of their podcast or monetization of their podcast, or the technical aspects and learn about editing software and editing tips and tricks. You name it, and there's a path that they can go down and they can jump between different tracks. So that's the overall format of the event, and that won't change a whole lot. One of the biggest things that we've added this year, based on feedback last year, is what we're calling our Q&A stage, and we have some different experts from different topics. So some are technical experts and professional audio editors. Some are WordPress experts. We have one guy who's a podcaster who's an attorney who does a lot of copyright work and things like that, that has specialized in the media space and the podcast space, and all these people will be on this Q&A stage, and it's just an open forum. Come ask your questions to these people about this, about their expertise, and there's not a presentation, there's not a talk, it's just almost office hours type thing with these experts. So that's something we're really excited about. And then we're really trying to build a whole lot more on community events this year. So last year and the year before, really, from the start of the event to the first day all the way till the end on the last day, we had it super scheduled. We had back to back to back to back, and it was really overwhelming for the attendees, and we heard about it. So this year we're adding a little more cushion throughout the day, adding an extra 30 minutes to the lunch breaks, putting some dedicated time for people in some of the evenings to get together and hang out. What we're also doing is helping people who are putting together their own meetups or their own group events. We're going to help them promote those and put it on a general schedule on the website so people can see all the different unofficial, so to speak, things going on, and really kind of find their community or find some places to be and some people to meet, and step back a little bit, because we did, super plan it out, super scheduled, and we heard the feedback that, hey, maybe you're doing too much. And if someone tells me I'm doing too much and I kind of agree with them, that was all I needed to hear.
Let me ask you this. In these months leading up, does it feel different from kind of a pre-event buzz? Because as just a Twitter follower and kind of a monitor of the medium and talking to guests and stuff, it feels like there's a building intensity here that wasn't necessarily in the previous 2 years. Do you guys feel that as well as founders, organizers?
Yeah, and it's hard to pinpoint what exactly that is. I mean, I think all of us that have been a part of this podcast thing, even for the past few years, but certainly the people that have been part of it for longer than I have, they feel it just because there's more buzz about the industry as a whole. So I certainly think that's a contributing factor to the buzz about the event. But I'd like to think, some of the buzz is because we're starting to build this thing. We have this momentum ourselves for podcast movement. It's kind of cool seeing some of the people that reach out to me and some of the producers and executives from some of these podcasts and these podcast networks that I really admire. People that 2 years ago we would have been begging, hey, can you send us your assistant producer to sit on a panel so that we can put your network name as someone that's represented at our event, to whereas now, they're filling out the contact form at podcastmovement.com, which is really humbling for us to be in that position, but kind of a cool feeling to validate some of this work we've done, because, look, anyone who's run events can tell you they're not easy money, they're not quick money. And so far for the first 2 years, they're no money, right? Everything we've done, we've reinvested to try to build that foundation and continue to build for the future and build something that we think is really awesome and really valuable. And at the same time, I know our prices are high for some people, but we really do fight and push to keep the attendance prices low, really the sponsor prices low, because a lot of the sponsors are people just trying to scratch and claw in the industry to make something cool. So we try our best to be cognizant of, we could probably gouge some things this year or last year and shave a little off the top, or add a little to the bottom line. But ultimately, we're in this for the long haul. So I think that that the momentum that we're building is just kind of a good thing, and it's a testament to the hard work of everyone who's helped us. And going back to the first year, quite honestly, I said all those people were there as volunteers. Pretty much they were. All the speakers were there as volunteers, and they saw that vision, and they saw it as something that the podcast community needed. So they all, put their time and efforts forward towards it as well.
So you guys are just over 60 days away as we speak, as people are listening to this right now. For folks who maybe are coming to this somewhere during that 60-day period of time, give us an idea of what that road's going to be like for you and the group putting together. What are the details you guys are still hashing out, working out? What are some of the things settling up between now and July 6th?
Well, I can tell you the biggest pain in our side, and my side specifically, right before we started recording, it's what I was dealing with. Chicago is, and specifically the venue, is a union town, which means that pretty much any labor that you're using in between those walls at the hotel and at the venue have to be union workers, and because of that have to be paid union rates, which that meant nothing to me about a year ago. But now that I've gone through, I realize it basically means that you're paying a whole lot more for everything. And from what I hear, they're not trained as well as some of these people that you might, companies and experts in some of these things. So that's one of the big things, is still trying to keep the finances in order. As the CPA, that's something that I enjoy, but when it's your money versus a client's money, it's a little different. And dealing with unions and quite honestly figuring out unions still, that's the biggest thing. One thing that specifically what I was just working on is trying to get the camera crew set up. We have 8 different cameras going at once at the peak of the event. That's a big crew to manage, and that's a big investment. So trying to make sure we do it the right way and get people in there that are going to record the sessions well enough so that virtual ticket is worth what people are investing into it. Just small things like that. There's programs to print. There's name badges to print. There's lanyards or signage. There's just so many little things that while the moving pieces, a lot of them revolve around the speakers and the schedule, which for the most part internally is pretty set in stone at this point. The fun is just getting started for us.
What is the size of the team, Dan? How many of you actively working on this to put this event together?
For the most part, 95% is myself and my co-organizer, Jared Easley. We're doing almost all of it. Like I said, we're starting to try to figure out how to bring on some help. It's hard. It's anyone who's started a business or built anything, with it being kind of your baby, you're a little hesitant to hand off any of the duties, but at some point you're hindering the business more than you're helping it. So we've got some people helping us coordinate some of the staff that'll be on the ground at the event this year. One of the biggest complaints, one of our biggest issues that we were all aware of as it was happening last year was we had some long lines at the registration process. We didn't have our systems down there, so that first introduction to the event for some people was not a great one, and that bothered us. That bothered us very much. So this year we're bringing on some extra people to help that process, and just a bunch of little things like that we're trying to figure out ways to more or less multiply us and put some people in place that can make it just a smoother and more enjoyable process for everyone.
Yeah, I can't imagine putting together something like that. I'm just imagining you and Jared just at a printer for like hours, printing out flyers. And labels and name badges. And imagine a Friday night beforehand, you guys are just forget about the fireworks on the 4th. We've got to build these welcome bags.
Well, yeah. So a little bit of both ways. We certainly outsource some of that printing, but our days before the last 2 events was exactly like you just described. We had a little assembly line stuffing 20 or 30 items in about 1,200 goodie bags last year, the night before the event. So that's not too far off.
Tell me, Dan, somebody's listening to the show right now. They are a show that's 3 or 4 months old. Maybe it's just them and a buddy having fun. They get like 100 downloads a week, okay? Do you feel that somebody in that position might want to look at podcast movement if they've got in the back of the head that they want their show to grow?
Yeah, totally. And I think might is the perfect word, because a podcast movement and what we're doing, it's not for everyone. That exact scenario that you described, that's me. That's non-podcast movement me. My buddy and I have a podcast that we're trying to get to grow. We get a few hundred listeners an episode. It's not huge. We just enjoy having fun. But we are actively looking to grow it and figure out what we can do to take it off. So that might make podcast movement a good fit for us. And that's really a case-by-case basis. What we have built is an event that we think anyone who is either looking to get into podcasting or currently podcasting can come to and, get great value of. The whole all this effort we've put forth in putting really great speakers on the stages and putting some really interesting and informative topics together really is to 100% try to put a very good learning experience together. That's why we have over 100 sessions, because we want to have sessions catering to everyone from the most new podcaster all the way to the most experienced. There's going to be sessions that you can learn from, find out things you don't know, and you're going to get a benefit from. That's the biggest thing that we want people to take away from the event. But something that a lot of people that have come to the past 2 years events have told us was as valuable as the sessions, and maybe even more to them, was just being around that many podcasters in one place for 2 or 3 days. It's an experience that you're not able to replicate anywhere. And I think that's one of the coolest things for us that we've created is this once a year destination for podcasters to come spend time with other podcasters. We see people hanging out in the bars late at night, not necessarily getting drunk. They might be having some drinks, but they're there taking advantage of the time that they have around other podcasters. And I think that's very important. And what we've heard is that a lot of people that podcast weekly, maybe it's an interview show, maybe they have a co-host across the country, but one of the most common things is people tell us what we do is so impersonal, in the sense that it's usually us talking to our computer screen like you and I are right now, Dan. And that's cool. We're enjoying this, but when we meet this summer at Podcast Movement, we're going to have that online relationship, and we'll be able to take that to the next level and meet in person. And hopefully 1,500, 2,000 other podcasters will be doing that same thing. And just being able to take that online relationship, those online friends, and take it offline is a really cool experience for a lot of people. And it's something that, like I said, I don't design the conference for that to be the most valuable piece, but I think a lot of people have that feedback when they go. So those are the two big things that we try to, create with the environment of Podcast Movement. So to answer your question, it might be a good fit, and people can, if they check out the website, if they read about it, if they shoot me an email, I'm more than happy to see if it's a good fit for them or not. And we certainly will tell people, it's not a good fit this year. It might not ever be a good fit, because we're very cognizant of the investment that we're asking people to make to attend, and very cognizant of letting people know if it's not a good fit, and if they could buy a new microphone or pick up a new piece of software or something that might be a better investment for their podcast.
Yeah, and I think just pull out two things you said there that I think are ultra important. One you said there, one you said previously. The networking piece probably is something that you'll never be able to create in terms of that many people in the industry around there, as well as the sessions, of course. But hypothetically, if there is that time window when either there's a session maybe that doesn't interest you, or maybe a session that you feel like you have a general grasp on it, you've always got that virtual ticket, right, kind of backing you up, like you mentioned earlier, where you said, it's not the end of the world if you miss something, because you will have access to it later, and maybe you could use that time to meet even more people, or having more conversations, or kind of pick someone's brain one-on-one.
Yeah, and I, as someone who's attended podcast conferences before, that's something I regularly do. And I went to a small one in Florida a few months ago, and just sitting in the lobby talking to Dave Jackson, a friend of mine who's been in the podcast space for 10 plus years, I think now, and talking to him about my podcast and saying, hey, here's our idea for it. Here's what's going on. Here's why why we're struggling. What thoughts do you have? And just being able to talk to somebody in person. This is somebody I know, have an online relationship with, but never would have had this conversation with him online. And he gave some awesome feedback and some awesome thoughts that we put into place, and I think worked. And that's just one of those interactions that I have personally been affected by that has helped me. And I know those are going on all over the place at Podcast Movement. So you're exactly right.
Dave Jackson, another former Podcast Digest guest. I would just like to point that out, folks. If you want to hear more about what Dan's talking about, Dave is awesome, and he was so kind to join me way back in March of 2015, episode 31, folks, if you want to hear more from Dave. He is a super cool guy as well. So you mentioned a couple times, Dan, and I want to talk a little bit about it. If nothing else, for this show title, you do have a podcast, Men Seeking Tomahawks. Tell folks, what is this show that you've been referencing, and where did this name come from?
The name I cannot take credit for. My co-host had the idea to do a podcast. He didn't know what about, but he somehow came up with that name and determined that whenever he did a podcast, it would be called Men Seeking Tomahawks. But what it ultimately meant, it's basically two guys who, at least up until a few months ago, were the button-down, wear a suit to work every day kind of guys. But they're going to do this podcast once a week that allows them to kind of go out into the wilderness and seek out some things that interest them and talk about topics that they're not talking about at work on a daily basis. So it's just kind of that two guys going out and seeing what interests them outside of their daily lives. That's the closest tie-in to the name Men Seeking Tomahawks. But yeah, it's us two doing. We format it much like a radio show in that it's an hour long. We have 3 specific segments, and those segments are 3 different topics. And we pick anything from sports to music to beer to technology to current events, news. We do some investigative journalism from time to time. Really just a classic variety show. We try a little vaudeville type things thrown in. We do bits and characters and things like that too. So really just a fun show that we have fun doing, that's slowly growing and slowly getting interest from other people. And quite honestly, the reason I started doing it was this is a buddy that I went to school with that we had fallen out of touch, and it's a good excuse to hang out with him every week. And oh, by the way, now we're creating some content that people enjoy and we enjoy making. And I think there's a lot of podcasters, a lot of hobbyist podcasters that's the exact same reason they do it, is because they just enjoy the time spent every week or every month or whatever it is with their friends having a good time. And the end result is almost a byproduct. But my comment to that and what we ultimately realized is, well, we're putting all this effort and all this time into it. The least we can do is try to maximize what happens on the back end with it. So that's a little bit of the story of Men Seeking Tomahawks. It's very passive listening. So anyone who's looking to put something on in the background at work or at the gym and not have to use your brain too much, it might be a good option.
I think it's a super cool dichotomy you got, Dan. You've got, on one hand, you've got this significant role in the largest national podcaster conference that brings in some, huge national public radio, storytelling, business podcasts, all the big stuff over here. But on the other hand, you got you and your buddy kind of just having fun, which is so relatable to so many people. It's really cool, I think, that you have an obvious connection on sort of both planes of the podcasting world, if you will, sort of the more professional side as well as, you and a buddy sitting down together every week. I think that's great.
And having a beer. We never leave the beer out.
Well, it looks like bourbon in the picture on the website.
Yeah, that was for the photo shoot, Dan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Normally beer. Well, Dan, if folks want to find more about Men Seeking Tomahawks, where can they go?
Probably you can go to menseekingtomahawks.com, or for going to see anything I'm doing, it's danfranks.me. That's kind of the home base that links to everything I'm doing, whether it's Men Seeking Tomahawks or Mid-Roll or Podcast Movement. So that's anyone for whatever crazy reason would be interested in seeing what I'm up to, that would be it.
and Podcast Movement itself. Give folks the website, the Twitter handle. If folks have been kind of intrigued by our conversation in this session in July, tell folks where they can get all the details about Podcast Movement.
Yeah, nice and easy. Everything's Podcast Movement, podcastmovement.com. That's what our handle on Twitter as well as on Facebook. We have a really active Facebook group that I invite anyone who's, even if you're not coming to the event, just search for the Podcast Movement Facebook group, not the page, but the group. And there's a lot of active conversations. People will come in and ask questions about software or hardware, or why isn't iTunes updating? I think we can all relate to that a little bit. It's a really cool active Facebook group. But like we were saying, I encourage anyone, if you think that Podcast Movement might be right for you, but you're not sure, feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to talk to anyone, because like I keep saying, and it's very important to us to recognize that we are asking a big investment of anyone who attends Podcast Movement. So I'm happy to talk it through with anyone to see if it's a good fit for them.
Excellent. And folks, I'm going to have links to all that. And you mentioned that Facebook group. I was going to bring that up. I kind of clicked over there as well. And yeah, as short as 3 hours ago from the time of our conversation, people were putting in some hardware questions and back and forth, and multiple comments over the last several days as well. So definitely very active in there, and might be just worth bookmarking, folks, just in general, if you're a podcaster, in case you ever run into a wall for something.
Yeah,
so
yeah, totally.
All the Podcast Movement, all of Dan's shows, all of that will be in the show notes, folks, as always. Dan Franks, thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
Dan, I appreciate it. It was a blast, and I'm a fan.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm a fan of your work as well. I mean, obviously, we've got such similar guest lists, although you guys have pulled in, 10 times as many awesome people as I've had the opportunity to talk to so far. So
in due time, Dan.
Well, I just talk to one a week.
Yeah,
if I could get them all on one show, it'd be like a 12-hour show at least. So
there you go.
I'd run out of energy. Folks, that will do it for this week on the Podcast Digest. If you liked what we talked about, make sure to check out those links in the show notes, folks. Lots of great information about Podcast Movement there, and I strongly encourage you guys to at least take a look at it and see if it's something you might want to consider. If not, at least follow the Twitter account and get updates on it for this or future years. I think it'll definitely be worth your time and interest. Until next week, folks, that'll do it for this week. My name's Dan Lizette, and I will talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.